The Honourable Taylor Martin.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise to speak on the Uranium Mining and Nuclear Facilities Prohibitions Repeal Bill 2019. The bill seeks to remove all state-based legal impediments to uranium mining and the construction and operation of nuclear facilities in New South Wales. If the bill is enacted in law, the prohibition on uranium mining in New South Wales will be lifted, making it legal for the first time since 1987 to mine for uranium within the state boundaries. However, the prohibition on nuclear facilities would still remain in place as a result of the prohibitions enacted in Commonwealth legislation. In 2050, I will still be of working age. I'm likely the only person in this place that can say that. So when people advocate for net zero emissions by that date, I'm concerned. This issue is important to me and my generation. In the long term, we will need emissions-free power to not only replace our existing electricity generation capacity, but we will also need to be able to meet the future needs as electric and hydrogen vehicles replace the petrol and diesel vehicles that we currently use on our roads. That is an immense amount of raw energy to replace. We may even head down a road of widespread water desalination to supercharge agriculture throughout New South Wales. We can only do this with vast amounts of new, dependable, emissions-free power, and the next generation of nuclear power can certainly do just that. As members are aware, this bill was referred to the Standing Committee on State Development for an inquiry which I chaired. The inquiry was incredibly thorough. The inquiry provided a timely platform for debate on whether nuclear energy should be considered on its merits as a possible energy source in the state's future energy mix. It presented an opportunity to gather the facts about nuclear energy based on the best available science and technology and to evaluate the prospects of nuclear energy as a zero-emission source of electricity. During the inquiry, we visited the Beverley uranium mine in South Australia and learned how uranium is extracted there. Beverley uses in-situ recovery, low-impact mining methods to recover uranium. This method results in low service disturbance and extremely low radiation to workers. We visited the Opal reactor in Lucas Heights to learn about the work that ANSTO does. What we learned is that Australia has played a significant role in the nuclear fuel cycle and the expertise around it. We also held 3 public hearings where we heard from experts. The people we heard from had many different backgrounds and experiences, including science, government, unions, the private sector, and of course from activists. In the foreword to the report, I noted that the current Act, the Uranium Mining and Nuclear Facilities Prohibitions Act 1986, may be considered an artefact of its time, a post-Chernobyl era characterised by concern about the environmental and health impacts of nuclear, as well as fears of nuclear war and the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Since 1986, much has changed, and I must say, the old Cold War fears are now nowhere near as prevalent as the concern for the effect of fossil fuel emissions on our health and on the environment. Nuclear technology has improved, and there are further promising innovations such as small modular reactors being developed. In 2012, the government repealed the prohibition on uranium exploration in New South Wales, and it became legal to prospect for uranium in New South Wales pursuant to a valid exploration licence issued under the Mining Act 1992. But the prohibition on uranium extraction remains in place. Since lifting the ban on exploration in 2012, no uranium exploration licence has ever been issued in New South Wales. Because who wants to go and expend funding looking for something that you're banned from extracting? During discussions in this place and in the corridors in this place and on the benches in this place, that some members have said that there won't be an industry in New South Wales even if this ban is lifted. Well, I'm glad we had the inquiry, Mr Deputy President, because we heard from the department who informed us that mineral sand mines are already extracting uranium in New South Wales. It's actually already happening. It is a byproduct of mining processes that take place currently. But because it is prohibited, because we have had our heads in the sand on this matter, they are directed and obliged to simply bury this valuable resource back into the ground. Absolute madness. Let's get on with it. It happens legally just over our border in South Australia. This is how nuts the existing prohibition actually is. We are literally burying any uranium back into the ground because doing anything of value with it is illegal. So much extra effort just to put it back in the ground. The repeal of this Act, however, will not result in a new uranium mine being established tomorrow. Any new mine would still be subject to the usual safeguards including development consent, mining lease processes, exploration licences and environmental protection plans. In addition, there would be requirements that don't exist for other mining operations as a result of handling radioactive material. Rather, the bill will signal to the market that their investments in exploring for uranium will be responded to in good faith. I recognise that the repeal of prohibitions could give rise to baseless scare campaigns. I would welcome any work undertaken with a view to a strategic release framework which would give assurance and certainty across New South Wales. According to the International Energy Agency World Energy Outlook 2018, there will be an increase in nuclear power generation of between 40 and 90% by 2040. Australia has 1/3 of the world's known uranium resources, and modelling by RMIT in 2015 showed that if we fully harness this opportunity, a uranium sector could employ more than 20,000 people and deliver between $6 and $9 billion per annum to the Australian economy into the future. It would support highly skilled science and engineering positions, such as radiologists, chemists, radiation specialists, reactor operators, chemical engineers, health physicians, contract lawyers, mechanical engineers, nuclear engineers, financial managers, material scientists. Mr Deputy President, you can imagine the list of STEM opportunities goes on and on. There are well over 400 nuclear power plants operating around the world at the moment, including 95 in the USA alone. European nations are heavily reliant on nuclear power for their energy needs. France has 56 operable nuclear reactors, which last year generated 71% of the country's electricity, and furthermore, crucially, exports this power to neighbouring European countries, and also importantly, provides synchronous power to support large installations of intermittent asynchronous power. You can ask South Australia, or even California at the moment, what happens when you ignore the facts and ignore the science on this particular issue in a blind adherence to the intermittent wind farm and solar farm pipe dream. 11 countries in Europe, including Belgium, Finland and Sweden, were reliant on nuclear generation for more than a quarter of their power needs in 2019, and the UK not far behind that figure. Earlier this month, Egypt announced that they will begin construction on their first nuclear power plant next year. When that 4,800 megawatt power plant is completed in 2028, the plant is expected to account for up to half of Egypt's power generation capacity and boost the country's economy and industrial development by creating up to 50,000 jobs in industry. This is an important point. Secure, reliable, affordable energy creates jobs across all industries. This is the real difference between the realists and the Green New Deal zealots. The realists recognise that when energy production is more efficient, electricity is cheaper and jobs are created across all industries. The zealots think that you create more jobs by paying more people, import wind turbines from China and install solar panels on roofs.
Order. When I call order, that means you stop. I call the Honourable Taylor Martin to order for the first time. I call the Honourable David Shoebridge to order for the first time. It's unnecessary. The member may proceed.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. As well as addressing power supplies, Egypt will also have a significant desalination capacity to provide water in this mostly desert country. Also this month, a very similar story from the United Arab Emirates, except that they have actually completed their project, which has now begun operations at its first nuclear power plant at Baraka. The South Korean-built reactor is the first of 4 that will come online over the coming years. The plant will be able to produce a quarter of the UAE's electricity at a quarter of the cost of the gas, and they plan to export that power to other Gulf countries.
Yes.
Closer to home, Indonesia is also considering a proposal for a nuclear power plant. Despite operating 3 research reactors and no power plants so far, national acceptance of nuclear power has been polled at 77%. Bangladesh is another country in our neighbourhood that is building nuclear power plants, with 2 new power stations to be completed by 2025. As neighbours, we are missing significant opportunities by being so ignorant and not engaging with this industry strongly as our neighbours begin to engage and move ahead with the next generation of nuclear technology. After decades of promises and subsidies for wind and solar, we still only generate just over 7% of our electricity in New South Wales from renewable sources, as outlined in the New South Wales Electricity Strategy. These sources are never going to be able to power the competitive industrial manufacturing economy that New South Wales deserves. I'm not convinced that wind and solar firmed with gas, batteries and pumped hydro could provide 100% of the state's future low-emissions electricity needs while keeping costs down for residential and business consumers. Small modular reactors could certainly be the replacement for our coal-fired baseload that we keep on searching for. In these new designs, we have a secure, reliable and dispatchable form of electricity capable of filling the gap that will soon be left. In addition, nuclear power is emissions-free and therefore will greatly assist our state and country to reach net zero emissions without the sacrifices that would be required if we rely solely on intermittent wind and solar. This technology-agnostic approach is similar to the approach that was adopted by the Democrats in the US as part of their platform at their convention just last week. For the first time since 1972, the Democrats have acknowledged the positive role that nuclear energy can play in electricity generation. In particular, it mentions the urgent need to decarbonise the power sector. Our technology-neutral approach is inclusive of all zero-carbon technologies, including hydroelectric power, geothermal, existing and advanced nuclear, and carbon capture and storage." End quote. I want to make a comment on the safety of both uranium mining and nuclear facilities, as our inquiry spent much time looking at this issue in particular. When managed safely, the annual exposure to ionising radiation for a mine worker is incredibly low, just 1 millisieverts per year. This is less than half of what domestic airline pilots are exposed to during their job. It is also much less than the exposure you receive during a CT scan at 5 millisieverts per year. In fact, I've had 3 CT scans myself in the past year, and that would expose me to around 15 times the radiation that a worker in this industry that we're talking about here tonight would actually be subjected to. In fact, Mr Deputy President, Parliament House in Canberra emits more radiation than a nuclear power plant may well do in New South Wales because of the large amount of granite and other natural stone used in its construction. These materials naturally emit radiation through trace amounts of uranium. A recent fact sheet from the Minerals Council of Australia said, although the levels are minuscule, they are likely higher than would be acceptable at an Australian nuclear power station.
David Shoebridge to order for the second time.
I would say, Mr Deputy President, that exposure had no impact on the Honourable Mark Latham during his 11 years in Canberra. Others may well argue otherwise. The safety of nuclear technology has advanced in leaps and bounds since the 1980s and now is worthy of consideration in the state's future energy mix. This was a view shared by the Nuclear Fuel Cycle Royal Commission in South Australia in May 2016 in its report to the Labor government. It found sufficient evidence of safe operation and improvements such that nuclear power should not be discounted as an energy option on the basis of safety. In addition to the gains in safety in the designs of reactors, nuclear power plants have a tangible impact on human health. A study in 2013 found that the employment of nuclear power globally has prevented an estimated 1.84 million air pollution-related deaths and 64 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions that would have resulted from fossil fuel burning instead. It is a good thing that Australia is an active participant in global nuclear discussions through ANSTO. It was a finding of the inquiry that Australia's engineers, nuclear physicists and other scientists are highly esteemed and serious players on the international nuclear science and technology scene. The presence of these individuals working here in New South Wales forms an important part of our research and engineering community and provides the competitive advantage to New South Wales of closely following international developments in energy technology. In particular, the nuclear research cluster at ANSTO is very valuable. However, we must take an even greater role in the nuclear fuel cycle. By not doing so, it is a real national security risk that other countries are getting in on the action and developing a nuclear industry in our own neighbourhood, and we are being left behind by our own ignorance. The strategic importance of a role in the nuclear fuel cycle has been recognised by the United States government. In 2019, the Nuclear Fuel Working Group was formed and tasked with crafting a plan for reasserting US nuclear energy dominance. I'd also like to briefly mention, as I mentioned earlier, the waste, and I want to go a bit further in detail if time permits, because it will no doubt be a factor taken into consideration by some members when considering the merits of repealing a ban on uranium mining. When fully encapsulated, stored, recycled or disposed in purpose-built facilities, handled by experts in radiation protection and nuclear safety, the risk to the public from spent nuclear fuel is negligible. Absolutely minuscule. All of Australia's used fuel from the Opal reactor is sent to France for reprocessing. This process allows for the recovery and reuse of unexhausted fuel. and the small amount of residual waste is then shipped back to Australia for management and disposal. And I've actually sat on a container myself at Lucas Heights, which holds Australia's spent fuel safely. The South Australian Royal Commission found that the storage of used fuel and intermediate level waste could be undertaken safely in a permanent geological disposal facility in South Australia. This would have the potential to deliver significant intergenerational.
Order! Order! I call the Honourable David Shoebridge, which no doubt you have intended, to order. I call the Honourable Member to order for the third time. Clark, have we got the relevant lock?
Great stuff.
According to Standing Order 192, I order the black rod to escort Mr Shoebridge from the chamber. You are, what's the term? Removed from the chamber for the balance of proceedings this day. Now, there's not much longer to go. Can I make the observation that the Honourable Taylor Martin is actually on 2 calls, and he's not the only one on 2 calls. We're going to get through this without pointless interjections. There needs to be a degree of discipline shown by members. The member may proceed.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President.
Yeah.
As I was saying, intermediate level waste could be undertaken safely in a permanent geological disposal facility in South Australia. This would have the potential to deliver significant intergenerational economic benefits to that community. Furthermore, it must be made clear the issue with waste is not that there is no solution. The issue is that there is an array of options available between permanent storage, say with Synrock and Australian technology, or reprocessing fuel for future use. I would have spent more time on this if time permitted and stunts weren't pulled. In November 2019, the District Council of Kimber, South Australia, conducted a ballot in relation to the construction of a national radioactive waste management facility at one of 3 nominated sites, 2 of which were within its own local government area. 61.6% of residents that were polled in favour of the facility. 61.6%. In February 2020, the Commonwealth Government identified Napandi near Kimber in South Australia to host the facility and approved that when they are engaged and empowered, the local community is able to have a rational debate. The concerns around nuclear waste need to be compared to the waste caused by cheaply made, imported, non-recyclable photovoltaic solar panels and associated batteries. The International Renewable Energy Agency estimates there will be 78 million metric tonnes of solar panel waste by 2050 alone. Finally, Mr Deputy President, I want to make the point that I am looking for an outcome on this issue, as most members in this chamber know. I recognise that as a member of the Legislative Council, it's extremely unlikely that we will ever have an absolute majority in this Parliament or going forward in this Parliament. I would never make my decision to oppose a bill based on the party that the member who has moved it is in. Last year, a bill for abortion law reform was moved by a non-government member and it was supported by many government members. This is a reality of this term of Parliament. As a member of the Liberal Party in a coalition government, we have a well-established process when it comes to the adoption of policy. Cabinet considers bills and is then put before and debated by the Joint Party Room. This process is still playing out. No matter what I believe and no matter how strongly I believe about the subject matter, I'm a strong believer in this process. Until the Liberal and National parties are able to properly discuss these issues in the party room, I would strongly advise the mover of this bill to accommodate the adjournment, leave it in play. Don't let this get voted down tonight just because our process has not played out yet. The government has clearly been working towards this timeline. The committee came to this subject with a lot of goodwill, and I was hoping that the good faith shown by the committee members, during the deliberations that have taken place over the last 15 months should be extended to the government as it works through the process. Thank you.